The audit committee meeting today. The first order of business is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Next is the approval of the December 16th audit committee minutes. Are there any corrections to the committee minutes? Can I get a motion and a second to pass the minutes from December 16th?
So moved.
Second. Thank you. Our first and only item of business is the state auditor's entrance exam with Stephanie Kuka and Zachary Bush.
Thank you. So we're here today to communicate with management and those charged with governance for matters related to the financial statement audit. And so we will go through just the packet that's right in front of you today. As far as the staffing from the state auditor's office, we are gonna have pretty consistent staffing with the last few years, which is great. And then we have already started our audit planning, updating our system narratives, performing some of our testing. And then we receive a schedule of completion dates from management, and that's what our workflow is based on. And we have already received that. The next section in your agenda talks about the Statement on Auditing Standards, SAS AUC Section 260, which is the auditor's communication with those charged with governance. So auditing standards defines those charged with governance, and it establishes communication requirements between us, your auditors, and those charged with governance. At the Metropolitan Council, we have identified those charged with governance over the financial reporting process as members of the Metropolitan Council and the Audit Committee. The next section talks about the audit scope and objectives and auditors' responsibilities under generally accepted auditing standards. We will be forming and expressing opinions about whether the financial statements are presented fairly in conformity with US GAAP. And we issue two opinions. The first is on the financial statements, and the second is on the Metropolitan Council's compliance with federal program requirements. We will be reporting on the internal control over both financial reporting and then compliance with provisions of laws, regulations, contracts, and award agreements, and then also on compliance related to major federal programs. We don't express an opinion on the effectiveness of internal controls. Our audit will be performed in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, standards for financial audits contained in the government auditing standards, the Single Audit Act, Uniform Guidance, and the Minnesota Legal Compliance Audit Guide for other political subdivisions. The next section goes over the responsibilities of management, which include designing, implementing, establishing, and maintaining effective internal controls, the selection and application of accounting principles, preparing the financial statements and the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. Additionally, identifying significant contractor relationships, making all financial records and related information available to us and for the accuracy and completeness of that information, providing us with access to information that you're aware of that's relevant to the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements, access to personnel, accounts, books, records, supporting documentation, and other information as needed to perform our audit, and any additional information that we may request for the purpose of the audit, in addition to unrestricted access to persons we determine it necessary to obtain audit evidence. If there were to be material misstatement, management will be responsible for adjusting the financial statements, designing and implementing programs and controls to prevent, detect fraud, and then informing us about any known or suspected fraud, identifying and ensuring that the Metropolitan Council is in compliance with applicable laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements, evaluate and monitor non-compliance with any federal statutes, regulations, and terms and agreements of federal awards, providing us with any documentation that uses or makes reference to our auditor's report or audited financial statements so we can review that that's consistent with our audit, identifying all federal awards received and understanding and complying with the applicable compliance requirements, preparing the required supplementary information and then any other supplementary information that's included in the ACFR, establishing and maintaining a process for tracking the status of audit findings and recommendations, identifying and providing us with copies of any previous financial audits, attestation engagements, performance audits, or other studies that are related to the objectives of our audit. And then providing management's views on findings, conclusions, and recommendations, as well as planned corrective actions at the end of the audit if any findings were to occur. And then also at the end of the audit, providing us with a signed management representation letter. The next section talks about other services. These are non-audit services that we sometimes perform. At the Metropolitan Council, we don't do any of these, so I'm just gonna skip right over that. But if it was to come up, we like to have this in our engagement letter so you're already aware of the terms. The next section, the overview of the plan, scope, and timing of our audit. We are going to be auditing the basic financial statements of the Metropolitan Council for the year ended December 31st of 2025. Because of the level of federal funding received, we will be performing a single audit. The Metropolitan Council will be seeking the Government Finance Officers Association, the GFOA certificate. This means that the report needs to have a final, it needs to be submitted to the GFOA by June 30th of 2026. We will also be applying procedures to the Financial Data Schedule, the FDS, which is a requirement of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, their Real Estate Assessment Center. And we will be working on the FDS in May after the HRA fund is completed, and then we expect to issue our opinion shortly thereafter, the Metropolitan Council's opinion for the REAC submission. We also apply certain agreed upon procedures to the data that's used for the federal funding allocation statistics forms, which are included in the National Transit Database reports, the NTDs. There's two of them, Metropolitan Council and Metro Transit. Per the 2025 reporting manual, the last day to submit the report revisions is July 1st with a closeout date of July 15th. So we plan to issue those two agreed upon procedures in late June. Our preliminary audit plan has us completing our audit work by the end of May, but that's really dependent on when we received information. If all goes as planned, we're expecting to issue our opinion on the financial statements and our management and compliance report by June 30th so that the Metropolitan Council is in compliance with the GFOA certificate program. And so in order for that to happen, we do have to turn in the report by May 29th, and management is already aware of the timelines. And then any audit findings that come up during the course of our audit will be communicated to management.
I'll take over at section 3 here. The engagement letter has been signed and returned to us. Section 4 goes over the the programs we'll be auditing as major programs for 2025. These are any programs greater than $1 million in expenditures. $3 million in expenditures. We've identified the following 3 programs as major: the Highway Planning Construction Cluster, the Community Project Funding Congressionally Directed Spending Program, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund as well. And then there is one Type A program, the Transit Cluster, which will also be audited as major. We anticipate these 4 programs will give us more than enough coverage to achieve the 20% that's necessary. However, it is subject to change based on information that comes to us during the audit and review of the final federal expenditures. Section 5 is the status of prior year audit findings. We had none in 2024, so there's no prior year audit findings to follow up on. Section 6 is the new accounting and auditing pronouncements issued by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. There will be 2 GASB statements that Council will be early implementing for December 31st, 2025. That's GASB 103 and GASB 104. We have discussed these with management. They're well aware of it, and we've kind of worked out a plan for addressing those. There is one GASB pronouncement that Council will be early implementing for December 31st, 2026, which is GASB 105, and we will communicate that with management when we get closer to that. Moving on to section 7, auditing standards require us to meet and communicate certain items to those charged with governance. Would you like us to meet with the full council to go over what we discussed here today? If not, we will distribute notes as we've done in the past.
Yeah, we can distribute notes as we've done in the past.
And then moving on, the following questions are fraud items we asked those charged with governance. Where have you identified the greatest risks of fraud in relation to the financial statements of federal programs?
As an audit committee, we hear about risks, key risks to the organization through our internal auditors and senior management through risk assessments, audit work, and other reports. The internal audit team considers fraud and risk assessments and audit work and has completed audit work related to fraud, including subrecipient oversight, made recommendations related to fraud and conducted investigations related to internal fraudulent activities, conflict of interest, and other policy violations that have led to disciplinary actions by management. Among areas that have been identified through these assessments as high risk include our federal capital programs, financial controls, contract management, grant management, and subrecipient monitoring.
And what is the policy or procedure for reporting actual, suspected, or alleged fraud? How is this communicated to employees and the public?
The council has systematic fraud controls to guide key financial business processes that detect and prevent fraud. Staff have used the concerns to report fraud to internal audit for further action. The council has fraud prevention and detection procedure HR 5-1E for employees that includes reference to the council's ethics point hotline for reporting fraud or other policy violations to teams that handle these complaints, including internal audit. There is also an external fraud reporting link on the external website for members of the public to report allegations of fraud or other information to internal audit.
And do you have any knowledge of any actual, suspected, or alleged fraud affecting the Metropolitan Council or its federal programs?
Internal audit reported us last year about fraud connected to an organization that received a federal grant from the Federal Transit Administration. We are aware that the internal audit team continues to follow up on their recommendations. Besides this case, we are not aware of other suspected fraud.
Do you have knowledge of any possible or actual non-compliance or waste or abuse of programs and controls occurring during the period being audited or the subsequent period?
No, not that we're aware of.
What is the council's role in the oversight of management's process for identifying and responding to fraud risks? Does the council take an active role in establishing policies and procedures to mitigate fraud risk, and how does the council oversee the established policies and procedures in place?
The council takes formal action to approve policies that help govern the organization. At a high level, the council has approved an employee conduct policy that then is operationalized through a series of procedures, including a fraud prevention and detection procedure, code of ethics investigations related to procedures. Council committees have an active role in reviewing business items for approval, during which time council members are able to and do ask questions of management. In addition, the audit committee approves the audit department charter and oversees the internal audit department and chief audit executive. This committee hears information about the effectiveness of internal controls, key risks, and relevant reports of fraud.
Do you feel the Metropolitan Council is in compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements?
Yes.
Do you have knowledge of any unusual significant transactions entered into during the year by the Metropolitan Council?
No, not that we're aware of.
And what is your understanding of the Metropolitan Council's significant related party relationships and transactions, and do you have any concerns about them?
So the council approves these relationships through business items of the council. To the extent council members have concerns about these relationships, they can ask questions of management and can refer concerns to internal audit or management for future investigations. We do not have any significant concerns about these relationships at this time.
Is there anyone else we should talk to regarding fraud?
We suggest you speak with senior management to include the CFO and the chief audit executive.
Great. And with that, I'll open it to any other questions, comments, or concerns.
Questions, comments from the committee?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead,
I have a
Mr. Ross.
question. In order for you to make your timeline, when do you, in your plan, when are you expecting to receive the final stuff?
About mid-May, we usually receive it.
Any other questions from committee members? And, have you need to vote for this one? We don't need to vote on this business item, so if there are no other questions or comments, we'll move on to the other. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
That was it. Our reports, the first one is the Chief Audit Executive Report.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, happy St. Patrick's Day. And thank you for navigating downtown a busy, snowy, wintry March day. So I'm going to go through some of my Chief Audit Executive report, and then I'm going to turn it over to some staff to talk through a couple other parts of this. Then we'll have some time at the end if you have any questions for me. Just first, a couple of updates to our staffing within the internal audit department. First, Nick Jelinek is working out of class as a senior manager for risk and compliance. So he's following me into the new function we've talked about in risk and compliance. So he is kind of working in both roles right now, finishing out some audit work, but also expanding work into investigations in some other areas in the new department. Guplan Koplanat is capably filling in for Nick in that working out of class as the audit manager. So he'll be taking over kind of Nick's half of the team in terms of that work and overseeing staff. Good news, we've got 3 new promotions to announce. So Brenda Bargefield, Amy Gillespie, and Sydney Kloster all were promoted from auditor to senior auditor. I just want to note that they all started with us as interns and have worked their way up, sort of proving the model that we've had of getting really smart people to come in, work hard, and find a pathway to grow their careers and become leaders in the organization. So kudos to all 3 of them. And then additional kudos to Brenna, who achieved her certified internal audit certificate, which is, if any of you know, is a very challenging certificate to get. 3 tests, all very challenging. A pass rate, I think it's like something like 50%. It's pretty low. So congratulations to Brenna. Just a kind of an update on where we are with the audit plan. You'll hear about the recruitment and selection and benefits audits today. So we've completed 2 of our projected plan. We're continuing to work on a number of other projects. You see the light blue is personnel files, that's just getting started. A couple other projects we're continuing to work on. I'll also note that we have 2 with our contracted service, Taliesin Solutions, that are in progress and expected to be wrapped up by June. Some other work that we're just getting started with as well. These I expect to be kind of in progress realm by the next meeting. Continuing to work on fare boxes, future service budgeting, preventive maintenance, facility accommodation compliance, and the police property room. Just some notes on some external audit work that we've been coordinating and tracking. The first is our Federal Transit Administration Triennial Review that actually took place last fall. And we're continuing to track because we still have several corrective actions that are due in the next staggered. One round was due in March, we have another in April and another in May. So we're continuing to follow up with FTA and staff across the organization to make sure that we get all of those corrective actions solved for. We also just a few weeks ago had a procurement system review from Federal Transit Administration as well. We are awaiting a draft report, but I will say that review went very well, and we are not at this time anticipating any findings in the PSR. So good news there. Minnesota Office of State Safety Oversight continues to monitor our light rail programs, and we're just in for a series of activity a few weeks ago, so we're continuing to track that, and of course you just heard from the state auditor as well. With that, I'm going to have Tim come up and talk a little bit about follow-up from our external quality assessment that you heard about as a committee last year.
Mr. Chair, before we do that, can I ask a question
Yeah, go ahead.
of Matt? What did working out of class mean?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, so it's a term that we use for staff that can temporarily work in a position while the position is being recruited for. So in other words, it's sort of a temporary designation. Mr. Larson, who's at the table, worked out of class for 9 months or so before he was appointed to the full position through a competitive process. That helps.
And then kudos to everybody for the promotions, but I also wanted to just note that for people to start here as interns and stick around, that's kudos to you too, Matt, for sure. You're creating an environment that obviously people are thriving in. And then I just love to see people getting their CIA designation, even though that's really a hard thing to do. What group, do you know how many folks on your staff have that designation? Do most?
That's an excellent question. Nick is showing me 3. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Raise your hand if you've got it. That's great. And does
We're getting close to most.
that's great. Does the council support
Yes.
the cost of that?
Yes, we do.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Matt right now?
Yeah, I'll just tell me when. Back. Oh, I forgot. I have one more thing. My slide is out of order. Yeah, sorry. This is just, these slides got flipped. Before we move on to the EQA, I just want to, so as part of my responsibilities to make sure you're aware of roles beyond internal auditing, which is part of the IA standards. I did want to just provide an update on my role as a CR, the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer. Just as a note, we will be posting the Chief Audit Executive position as a backfill relatively soon. I'm working with a recruiter on that. On behalf of Ryan O'Connor, Regional Administrator, will be the hiring manager on this. Just a few things, so a reminder, the 5 sort of pillars of the new department are ethics, complaints, investigations, enterprise risk management, internal controls, business continuity, and policies and procedures. A few of the activities I've been working on, we've been completing risk assessments in the ERM space. We've completed the risk assessment for regional administration and are planning and actually completing work on the survey and scheduling meetings for the Metropolitan Transportation Services and Community Development Divisions with Metro Transit on the horizon. In business continuity, a lot of work is continuing. One note was a recent simulation. I want to make sure everybody knows this was a simulation, not an actual thing, but an accident at the Metro plant and a programmed kind of response that we did on site at the regional maintenance facility. Within complaints and investigations, I just wanted to note that the team from OEO, the Investigations Resolution Unit, started reporting through my position earlier this year, so I've been working with that team. And we are going to begin triaging all complaints coming in through Ethics Point later this month in coordination with the other teams, with HR as well. And we are working on evaluation of existing processes to see if there's ways that we can improve the program and document our sort of new existing or new processes going forward. In the internal control space, I've been working, you'll hear later about Protiviti's work in internal controls documentation. I've been sharing that work with Ned Smith, the CFO. As of this year, I'll start taking on more of a role leading that effort for Protiviti to document further internal control sets. And then in policies and procedures, I've just taken solely more of a role just of reviewing policies and procedures that are coming through. So with that, any questions on that piece before I move on?
Any questions? Go ahead.
Jared, are you using an external or internal recruitment resource for the internal audit chief?
To be determined, and that's a conversation I have to have with the regional administrator. As of right now, we're doing it internally.
Okay.
Good question.
Any other questions, comments?
Okay, now I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So just to give a few updates on the work that we've done for the external quality assessment. So for those of you that weren't around or maybe just need a refresher, back in 2024, at the end of it, or end of 2024, we had external quality assessors come in, evaluate the internal audit department, specifically in relation to the conformance gaps between where we were at in the old standards, where we had some gaps between the old standards and the new standards, and then just some opportunities for improvement as well. So those are 3 sections I'll go over quickly. So the first one being staff development and resource strategy. So that is developed, it's currently in review. The strategic plan and the quality assurance and improvement plan also touch on this as well. Strategic plan is done, Sydney Foster talked about that in the previous audit committee. There were a handful of internal audit manual updates. So aligning, making comments about aligning with strategic objectives, speaking to advisory services that we handle, process for supervisory review, so we spelled out a little bit more detail of like what's expected. And then we have developed a procedure for our engagement risk assessment and how that should be played out or how that should be filled out. And then we added a few comments on audit opinions on unacceptable risk. And then as Matt mentioned previously, roles outside of his CA role, that was documented and updated in the charter as well. Next, there was internal audit data access. So this was in response to the external quality assessors identifying that we had a little bit of trouble and we were kind of inconsistent with getting access. So we made it very clear in our audit charter and policy that we have unfettered access to the data of the council. The internal audit quality program, again, that's a QAIP that's currently in review. Just got feedback and incorporating that as we speak. Monitoring and follow-up, we developed a procedure for that as well. So that process is currently in review as well. And then moving on to improvements. So evidence of supervision, so we updated our internal audit checklist to make it very explicit, like when the supervisory review were supposed to take place. That fed into Workiva, the software we're going to be using, and so those are established in the Workiva process as well. Internal audit technology, so this was just the external assessors made note of like a lot of our process manual. We're moving to a software solution, so that's being addressed there. External risks, some more just highlighting like that we are considering external risks both on the engagement level and the annual level. And those are noted in updates to the audit manual, the risk assessment procedure I noted, and then some toolkits I'll talk about in a moment. And then there was monitoring KPIs, so we do monitor KPIs, but again, making it more clear like what we're monitoring, how we're monitoring, those are updated in the documents you see there. Workiva will play a little bit of help in that realm as well. Continuing on with the standard gaps, again, this is between what we're currently doing and the now current standards. So we do, again, more audit manual updates to auditors are expected to have professional courage, operate with skepticism, and we have a method to communicate on ethical behavior, elevating it to managers, CAE, ethics point of view. Training, this gets back to the development strategy that I mentioned earlier, as well as there's an onboarding checklist that we're currently developing to help new employees when they come to the council. CA communication to senior management, again, this was putting a little bit more detail in how and when the CA should communicate with senior management and the audit committee. That was already done with the audit charter and the policy that was approved. Vision and strategic goals, again, going back to the strategic plan, that has been developed and discussed. Combined assurance, this was just to leverage the potential opportunities of the assurance work that goes on with other entities. So a matrix was developed. There is a plan, I believe, to move some of this, if not all of this, into Workiva. And then finally on this one, standard reporting format. So we had some inconsistencies with the templates we had been using in previous years. Again, Workiva, we've kind of standardized how that's going to look now. So. And because our department is full of overachievers, we have a handful of spin-off improvements that we identified to either help supplement the findings that the external quality assessors identified, as well as just things that, as we were doing this, we like, this would be good for the department. So the first one is the management response guide. This 2-page document just to help new clients, audit clients. Like, here's what we're expecting for an audit response. And then we developed some topical requirements and toolkits, again, trying to get at that external piece as well. Developed a couple of style guides. Since, again, most of our staff were former interns, we developed kind of a tips for success, things that we think would be helpful for interns as they're coming in to have a successful and rewarding intern experience. Amy talked about this in a previous audit committee as well, but updating the annual risk assessment process and scoring methods. And then the last tool we have is the audit engagement mapping tool. really just a visual tool to identify the internal, external stakeholders as well as the systems that are involved for an audit and just like the data and communication that happens between these entities. With that, I will say just in large, a lot of this stuff has been created, there's nothing really else that needs to be done except for the review, incorporating feedback. Gupta and I are planning to meet starting next week to go through and make, final edits and updates, and then we'll be on to Matt for his final review and approval. So, last thing I will say, I just want to thank the staff, Sydney, Amy, Brenna, and Ian, for helping out with this. It was a lot of work and generally trying to keep me on track, so. Any questions?
No, I agree. Questions, comments?
Thanks, Tim. I do just have a few last slides just on some follow-up information. And I don't have anything specific to say here other than we're continuing to track a lot of the items that we reported to you in the last couple of years. And have some, sort of graphical reports to show. I know that of particular interest, we are continuing to very closely track the Move Minneapolis, as I talked about a little bit earlier, report from last year, and have been able to close a few of those, still working on others. And several of those are actually in conjunction with our triangular findings. And you can just see some of the visual versions of this. I expect that some of these diagrams will change a little bit as we implement Workiva. We're importing all of this data into the new system so we can continue to track recommendations from past years into the future. And then this is just a list of some of the ongoing work. The EQA follow-up has been a lot of work for the team, and I just appreciate all of the work that they've done. As you can see, there's a lot, and it's been a lot of continuous improvement. I think it's really set us up for success going forward. I'll also say the Workiva implementation has gone very smoothly, I think. I mean, it's been, again, a lot of work, but feels like we're pretty close to the end of that implementation. And again, we'll move our team from really up almost a whole level of maturity getting into an audit software. So with that, I'll take any final questions before we get into the rest of the agenda.
Questions for Matt? All right, with that, we'll move on to the second report, the benefits eligibility report.
Chairly, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Stephen Yame. I'm here with Tim Larson and Ian Klein to present the benefits eligibility audit. So benefits eligibility is the council's formal process of extending benefits to its about 5,000 employees and their dependents. And every year we extend some of these benefits, which include medical, dental, life insurance, long-term disability programs, healthcare savings programs, amongst many others, to these employees. And these benefits are extended based on the laws and the union contracts to which these employees belong to. And so every year, there's an open enrollment process which is opened, and it allows employees to enroll and indeed change and terminate benefits for their themselves and their dependents. To do this, outside the open enrollment process, we also allow employees and their beneficiaries to change and amend benefits by going through a certain qualifying event. And therefore, any employee who has this qualifying event, like welcoming a new family member, or unfortunately going through divorce, or having a new marriage, there's an avenue for you to also enroll the new people who are becoming members of your family. And therefore, you need to produce certain documents that prove the qualifying event. And all these benefits and all these documents go through a process through the benefits team for them to validate it, and then you get the benefits extended to you. During the year, we also indicated that there was a third-party service called Benefits Focus that the benefits team is currently using to administer benefits for the council. The scope for this audit was from January 2024 all the way to July 2025. And we did this to ensure that we've captured, the broad versions of every opportunity, every change or every termination that occurred during the year, so that we could follow through the process to ensure that they are operating effectively. And so to do that, we used a variety of methods, which include reviewing and going through walkthroughs with the team to ensure that actually what they are saying is being done is what is existing. And then we also kind of went through what we call the IT access review process to verify that Benefits Focus, which is an IT application from a third party, and the benefits mailbox are also pretty secured. And so with this, we came up with 3 objectives for the audit. The first one was to evaluate the benefits eligibility process for compliance with all the contracts, all the regulations, and other statutory issues that we needed to abide by. The second one is also was to ensure that there's a process, a process exists and is published enough to ensure that anybody who's eligible was able to enroll, change, or terminate benefits in a timely, accurate, and complete manner. And the third, which is the last but not the least, is to ensure that the data that we collected was actually secure enough, that there were no leakages or potential leakages, and that we secured it enough. And then after the use of the data, we also kind of kept it in a secure place. And so with this, I would hand it over to my colleague Ian to take us through the number of testing that we did that, not necessarily brought out any findings, but just to show that the process is resilient enough.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Yes, so as stated, a number of our tests did not result in any findings, so I will go through each of those tests. So one test involved taking a sample of employees across all union contracts at the Met Council. In the sample, we did not find any employees who were not receiving benefits that were based on their union contract. So again, each employee in the sample received benefits based on the union contract that they belong to. Another sample involved taking both full-time and part-time employees. We found that each employee received benefits based on their full-time or part-time status. Another test involved looking at employees who had recently left the Med Council and whether or not the termination of their benefits happened in a timely manner. And so for the employees in the sample that we looked at, we found that each employee had their benefits terminated within 3 business days of their date of separation. Another test involved taking a sample of employees and reviewing their classification in job posting, in their in the human resources systems, and then in their union contract to make sure that the job classification was the same throughout. And again, we had no findings from this testing. Another test involved taking a sample of employees who went through the process of amending their benefits due to a qualifying life event. And we found that the process for amending benefits is operating effectively. And then lastly, we reviewed the annual disclosure form that the Met Council sends to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. We found this annual disclosure form is being completed in a timely and accurate manner. So those are the non-findings, and I will pass it over to my colleague Tim Larson to discuss the one finding that we have from this report.
So the one observation that we have, as we were reviewing so benefits as a joint mailbox to handle all the incoming requests and questions. So we were reviewing that to make sure things were being dealt with in a timely manner. That was responses as far as we observed. There wasn't anything that was staying in that inbox for more than 5 days. However, when we started poking around with the Purview tool, it came to light there were a handful of emails roughly about 55 to 60 that were sitting in an archive folder that did contain some PII in it in the form of marriage, birth, and FMI certificates. When we reviewed that or found that, they were anywhere from 11 to over 1,000 days old. The ones that are more recent, there was probably 4 or 5 that were in the 11 to 20 to 30 day period. The rest, there was a pretty noticeable gap that jumped up to like 500 and 600 plus days. So when we discussed the finding with the HR benefits group, they said, they do hold on to emails for retention purposes, depending on what the situation is. But a lot of these emails, like I said, were pretty old, and they predated everybody that was in the benefits department currently. So we had a couple of recommendations. The first was, is there a better place to store some of these emails other than an archived inbox or folder in an inbox, whether that's in benefit focus or network folder, wherever that may be. And then the other one was just to go through all those emails and just determine whether or not they're still needed. If they're not needed, get rid of them. So happy to say benefits, that department has already dealt with and made the improvements for those 2 recommendations. So that, we'll take any questions, but again, I do want to thank the benefits department for their help in this audit. It was a little bit longer than we were hoping. We had to make a number of requests for access, so appreciate their patience in this.
Questions for the presentation team? Colonel Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. So going to the PII in the mailboxes or in the archive folder specifically, I'm still fairly new to council, and every email I get has this thing's gonna expire on you.
On any day.
But we have items that were in there for over 1,000 days. Did those predate any retention rules? Or did we have retention rules? Would that be 5 years ago?
Chair committee member, I don't remember the retention. I know there's retention schedules for like the inbox itself. I'm not sure I'm gonna look to IS to see if there's any for the archive folders.
The archive, I will double check, but I believe the archive folders is like 2 to 3 years, but I can get the exact amount of time. But that's why you have the archive folders, but there is a retention date on the archive folders as well.
Okay. And then you also had mentioned that some of those emails were from employees who were no longer here. Did you find that those emails were moved from their mailboxes into the archive? Or were they automatically archived once that employee's service terminated?
Chair of the committee member, so from my understanding, it was employees that removed that, not from another inbox.
And they had moved it before their
Correct.
departure. Okay, thank you, that helps.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Seeing none, we'll go to the 3rd report.
Thank you.
This is the recruitment and selection process report.
Good afternoon, Chair Lee, members of the committee. My name is Lakshmi Mori. I'm here with my colleague Amy Gillespie, and we're going to be presenting our audit on the recruitment and selection process. So for the recruitment and selection process, a little bit of background information. So in 2023, the council did undergo a lot of increased turnover, which led to a lot of backlog in positions that needed to be filled. So as a strategy, HR implemented the unified recruitment strategy in order to address these concerns about the backlog, as well as prioritize different positions. And in 2024, the positions hired were around 1,130 positions were hired, and in the first quarters of 2025, 556 positions were filled. So for the recruitment and selection process, this refers to the hiring and filling of these positions for qualified candidates, whether internal or external. For this audit, the timeframe that we focused on was when the requisition was filed by a manager to when the position was filled. The council's talent management team is responsible for managing this process, and it's currently made up of supervisors as well as talent acquisition specialists, or TAS people. And currently HR uses NeoGov to track data on candidates during the recruitment and selection process. So the process currently has 8 phases, and according to HR, this process takes around 90 days or 3 months. So the first phase is vacancies, and this is when managers will fill in a requisition to HR. Then there is the actual posting, which it depends either on the bargaining requirements, but usually it'll take around 2 weeks for posting. And then HR will review these positions for minimum qualifications before they are sent out to managers and SME or subject matter experts. And then there will be a job-specific assessment depending on what the position is, as well as 2 rounds of interviews. So there's a structured panel interview as well as a selection interview. And then based on whether a candidate is qualified and they are hired for the position, OEO will complete a concur to hire at the end of the process. So we had 2 main objectives for this audit. So our first objective was to determine if controls are adequate according to the Metropolitan Council Policy HR 7-1, and any associated procedures are to ensure that the recruitment and hiring process is effective, efficient, and equitable. And then our second objective was to ensure that any systems and technology involved with the process are also effective, efficient, and controlled adequately to protect any employee and applicant information. The criteria that we used was not only internal council policies, this would be 7-1, as well as any procedures or work instructions. We also looked to any federal and state statutes, so this would include our affirmative action plans, as well as circulars and state statutes. And then we also looked at any industry best practices. The main one that we focused on was the Society for Human Resources Management, or SHRM. And then for our scope and methodology, we looked at 152 positions that were provided through NeoGov. And the scope of the audit took place from January 1st, 2024 to June 1st, 2025. We also interviewed any 21 hiring managers as well as 8 talent acquisition specialists. And for the sake of this particular audit, we did exclude interns, bus operators, police officers, and any other special recruitments, since those have a very distinct process. And we also excluded any positions that were hired by the program evaluation and audit department or involving management. And with that, I will turn it over to Amy, who will go over our limitations.
Awesome. Thanks, Lakshmi. So before we get into the findings of this report, I just wanted to discuss some of the issues that we ran into as we were going through testing, just to kind of frame the findings a little better. So you can find this section on pages 8 and 9 of your report if you'd like to follow along. But the first limitation that we ran into is that Audit was not able to independently access data from the NeoGov system. Without a work instruction, it was difficult for us to, while we were able to access NeoGov, to pull data in our scope in a format that was meaningful and useful to us. So we did rely on an HR business analyst to do that for us. However, so that was some of the milestone data that we had from NeoGov. For the hard copies that were stored in different locations, we were able to access that independently by ourselves. The second limitation that we had, so after we obtained this data from HR, unfortunately over time after we did some testing, we realized that we had not been given the correct type of data from NeoGov. So what had happened was the data set we retrieved or were given was when the milestones were created in the NeoGov system, not when they had occurred for a given candidate. So after we discovered this, we redid some of our testing and it didn't change any of the findings. That is something that we ran into as we were going along. And then finally, the last limitation that we ran into as we get into discussions about timelines, is there were some conflicting criteria on what constituted the start of the recruitment and selection process. So on the one hand, the council's affirmative action program stated that when the clock starts ticking when a hiring manager makes a request for a requisition. So that was the date that we initially had in mind. But then as we were talking with HR, we learned that HR considered the beginning of the recruitment process to be when a talent acquisition specialist or a TAS is assigned. to a requisition. So we had those two conflicting dates. Kind of the tricky thing was that neither one of those were being tracked at the council. So we weren't able to use either one of them for our analysis. So as a substitute or a proxy, we used the start date that was when the position was input into the NeoGov system. So when it was started in the system, that was the earliest available date that we could use. So all of those things considered, our analysis is based on the best data that was available to us. So with that in mind, we can get into the findings. The first finding reads that HR and OEO do not maintain quality data on their recruitment and selection process. So there's a few elements of this that I've already touched on. First, the dates for milestones of the recruitment and selection process are dispersed between multiple locations, which made the job of reconstructing the timeline kind of challenging on our end. Several dates were stored in the NeoGov system. However, there were additional milestone dates that were important to the process that were stored in the network drives, either belonging to HR or OEO. So we did a little bit of hunting for those dates. I also touched on the kind of conflicting criteria about the start dates and needing to use that substitute date as the beginning. And then later on, and I will touch on this a little bit more in our next finding 2, but we went to go and do some detailed milestone analysis testing on positions that had taken well over the 90 days. And so when we went to do that focused testing, we found, especially with the hard copy versions of the milestones, that they were missing from the network drives. And you can find a full complete list of those on table 3 in the report, but just as an example, the talent acquisition specialists will use a checklist as they're going through the process to check off milestones as they're occurring. And they were supposed to be stored in the network drive. However, 9 out of 25 were missing or not completed. And so when that happened, that was kind of a cascade of effects of the kickoff date is missing, the offer date was missing, things like that. All right, so to address finding number 1, we have 2 recommendations. The first recommendation is that HR should identify a milestone that constitutes the beginning of the recruitment and selection process and ensure that that date aligns with the affirmative action plan, EEO program, and all other HR documentation that exists at the council. Second is that HR should collect data on when the recruitment and selection milestones occur, aligned with the milestones that are listed on the standard recruitment and selection timeline, and HR should ensure that this data can be produced by the HR system, so it's NeoGov or something else, in a useful format that can be analyzed. All right, moving on to finding number 2. Finding number 2 reads that positions take longer than 90 days to fill and surpass industry benchmarks. So if you're following along in the report, kind of looking at table 5, this is one of those findings that has a lot of different numbers. But high level, overall takeaway is that about 2/3 of positions that we reviewed in our sample took longer than 90 days to fill, all the way from that NeoGov entry date until the offer was extended to the candidate. The average length of time for the randomly selected sample was 162 days, and the median length of time was 133 days. So compared to benchmarks from the Society for Human Resource Management, that's about twice as long or a little over twice as long as other peer public agencies or agencies that are approximately our size. And it's well over our target for 90 days. All right, so the second part of this finding that I referenced earlier was that detailed milestone testing that we did. So from our 2 samples that we took of positions, we took 25 positions that took well over 90 days. So the threshold is if it took 100 calendar days or longer, we pulled those to examine. And we were hoping to do we did some milestone testing just to see if there was any really glaringly obvious bottlenecks in the process that we could look at. So you can find a complete list on table 6 in your report, but some of the milestones that stood out to us, the length of time between the NeoGov position entry and then the start of the job advertisement, again, among these 25 positions was 81 days. The length of time between the structured panel interview to the selection interview was 28 days. The selection interview to the OEEO concur to hire date was 58 days, and then the selection interview to when the offer was extended to the candidate was 130 days. So going back to that first number, 81 days between the NeoGov entry and then the start of the job advertisement, as we were talking to talent acquisition specialists and hiring managers, a lot of them referred to that time as kind of dead time, when they're waiting and action isn't really being taken, that they felt that they maybe could. So for all of these, we can't say exactly what the cause of that was. It could be, given the data quality finding, it could be something going on with the data entry, or it could be something going on with the process for these 25 positions, but we really can't say for sure. So to address this finding, we have two recommendations. The first is that HR should compare the length of time elapsed between milestones to industry benchmarks and set a target for overall time to fill for continuous improvement. And then the second is that HR should assess the recruitment and selection milestones that are causing the most significant delays or bottlenecks, and align or allocate resources or combine or eliminate steps to address areas causing the greatest delay. All right, getting into finding 3. Finding number 3 is that controls are not adequate to ensure standardized compensation offers. So this was a finding that came to us during the interview process with both talent acquisition specialists and hiring managers. So during our interviews with TAS, we learned that the process for calculating a candidate's salary offer is completely manual, and that includes the process of finding comparator positions at the council that go into computing this offer. During interviews, most hiring managers reported concerns about how candidate experience is quantified or about concerns about how salary offers are calculated. So some of the feedback that I'm about to share that we got from hiring managers, some we were able to verify and then others we couldn't test, but we still thought it was relevant to share here. So one piece of feedback was that hiring managers believed that the salary analysis methodology was not transparent. They reported that HR does not consistently give credit for work experience gained in other industries. Anecdotally, we heard this quite a bit about management experience or customer service experience. We learned that HR does not count internship experience that took place outside of the council, or graduate level teaching or research positions, which we heard from hiring managers makes it difficult to recruit for entry-level positions that require advanced degrees to perform. We heard from hiring managers that they believe they don't have enough input on which internal employees or positions HR compares their candidate to in order to generate that salary offer. And then finally, hiring managers reported that candidates are sometimes brought in at pay rates that are not equitable compared to existing employees with similar qualifications. So after all of these interviews and what we learned, we identified 3 control deficiencies that contribute to this lack of standardization. The first control deficiency is that HR does not have a defined departmental strategy to guide the recruitment and selection process. The second is that while HR does define factors that are used to determine a salary offer, there's no policy, procedure, or work instruction that defines the methodology for how these factors are quantified or weighted during a salary offer. So originally when we were starting this audit, I had hoped to maybe sample some positions and see if I could recreate the process of weighting and if I could come to the same conclusion. But when I requested documentation, all that was available was an internal PowerPoint, and that wasn't enough detail for me to recreate the process and properly do this testing. So the finding stopped there. But the third control deficiency we identified is that HR has not been adhering to the classification review schedule, which requires all positions council-wide to be reviewed on a 3-year basis. So rather, positions are being reviewed on a case-by-case basis, either when the position is being refilled or when a manager requests a review. So this is an open recommendation from the job classification audit, which was completed in 2022. So we have 3 recommendations to address this. The first is that the Met Council Cabinet should work with HR to define a strategy that guides the council compensation offers. 2, that HR should create and document a process that outlines how employee credentials are quantified and weighted in the salary analysis process. And then finally, that HR should adhere to the classification review schedule and ensure that all council positions are reviewed on a cyclical basis. And I will hand it back to Lakshmi to talk about our fourth finding.
All right, thank you so much, Amy. So for our fourth finding, we found that HR and OEO do not monitor when protected groups withdraw from the recruitment and selection process. So when we say protected groups, we include women, persons with disabilities, as well as people of color. So in the state affirmative action plan, it clearly states that the council must track recruitment, employment, and retention data to understand where in the process these protected groups are falling out of the process and develop any strategies that impact retention rates of these groups. So this kind of goes back to the first finding that Amy previously went over, where since there is poor data quality maintained by HR and OEO, there can't be a very meaningful analysis done when these protected groups are dropping out of the process. So the council can't ensure if parts of the process are not being equitable or if they're being exclusionary at any point. And this does open up the council to any legal compliance as well as reputation risk. In addition, the council has had previously had federal funding delayed due to non-compliance with federal EEO regulations. So failing to fulfill any of these obligations could lead to further loss of any funding or any other punitive actions. So for our recommendation for this finding is that HR should create and implement a process to collect and analyze any data on when these candidates are withdrawing from the recruitment selection process, just to ensure that it is still equitable. And with that, I will turn it back to Amy, who will go over our last finding and recommendations.
Thanks, Lakshmi. So our last finding reads that HR is not sharing public data as part of the salary analysis process. So this is similar to our third finding. It came to us through interviews that we had specifically with hiring managers and caused us to do a little bit more investigation. But in addition to the hiring managers that reported concerns about how experience is quantified or how salaries are calculated, there were a number of hiring managers that just specifically cited overall transparency with the process and having concerns with that. One hiring manager in particular shared with us that they had at one point requested to view which council positions had been used as comparators in generating their candidate's salary offer, and that they had been told by HR to submit a data practices request. So we talked to HR about this, and we were not able to get a clear answer on whether this type of data is treated as private at the council. However, employee names, salary ranges, job descriptions, education, training, previous work experience, according to Minnesota statute, that is all public data for public agencies. So declining to share public data or creating barriers around public data does create distrust in the process. However, we do acknowledge that Human Resources is concerned about accidentally violating the pay history law. So we heard that, we understand that. So for our recommendations to address this finding is that HR and OGC, so the Office of General Counsel, should define what recruitment and selection information hiring managers have a business need to know. And then that HR should create and implement a process for sharing salary comparator information, such as salary, job, and education history for current employees with hiring managers. Right, so in conclusion, the recruitment and selection process at the council is not adequately controlled to ensure that the process is effective, efficient, and equitable. There's key processes, particularly around data entry, tracking, and analysis that are not adequately controlled to ensure completeness and accuracy in reporting. This poor data quality has a cascade of effects on HR's ability to monitor, to continuously improve, and transparently report on the council's recruitment and selection process. So improved transparency and standardization will likely improve perception of the process for talent acquisition specialists, hiring managers, and candidates. Our team would like to say thank you to HR and OEO and talent acquisition specialists and the hiring managers that we spoke with during this process. We really appreciate the collaboration and communication. So with that, we can take any questions, and we do have HR and OEO in the room if they would like to respond.
Questions for the presenters? Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of stuff to digest from 30,000 feet. I know from the people I work with, we bring on great people, but it looks like we have an opportunity to do much, much better. So, thank you for the work you did. Instead of addressing the whole thing, there are a couple places that I wanted to get some clarification on. If you can go back to slide 10. You talked about the hiring process and what the time is on each step. In my experience, and I have several, the gap I'm missing on here is from when the job is advertised to when applications, when, let's just say, the application process stops or you begin the interview process with your first candidate. And that, to me, I was expecting, I don't know if you have those numbers or if that was categorized differently. Cause that to me would be probably what I would expect to have the broadest range, depending on job category. You know, for example, if we've got something that, like a police officer, everyone is hiring police officers, there could be a large gap in candidate availability. So I would have liked to have seen that, to see how that contributes to the longer days, because did you notice, anecdotally or statistically, that there was a difference in that recruitment process for, say, trade skills versus professional versus part-time?
Yeah, so Chair Lee, members of the committee, thank you for the question. There's a few points that I want to address. There were some positions, so you had mentioned police officers as an example, and other, operators that were just too different from these positions, so we intentionally scoped them out because a lot of them, will take a longer time or they are continuous. We do have, so this here on the slide is just kind of a selection of those bottlenecks that stood out to us, but in the report, you should see the average length of time between the posting and then the closing of the position. And if I'm remembering correctly, it's about 30 days. A lot of times that'll be, I believe, specified either by the union or it'll close after a month. I did not notice specific or significantly unexpected differences between types of positions, but they were also in our scope somewhat similar. We weren't looking at police officers, operators, things like that, but did I answer all the parts of your question?
That helps, and then if I can do one follow-up, thank you. The other thing that you brought up that raised another question in my head is the high turnover we had in 2023. Is any of the extended onboarding time possibly due to having multiple people in a hierarchy, positions need to be filled? So for example, bringing on someone in the office may get delayed because we also need to hire that person's manager, for example. When you have such a high turnover, do you think that had any impact in backfilling, one, the quantity of positions, and then were there hierarchical impacts as well?
Chair Lee, members of the committee, thank you for the question. I think I will let, if HR would like to speak to that, I can't say for sure if there's a hierarchical component. I know that turnover has increased since 2020, so I would imagine that some of that is COVID related, but if HR would like an opportunity to speak to that.
Sure, yes, Cassandra Tabor, CHR, thank you, Chair and committee members. There is a component that comes into play when we're dealing with hierarchical. We work with each individual division to determine in their leaders, do you want to hire these at the same time, or would you like to bring in the hierarchical order first and have them do the hiring? We really base that on need and desire from the division.
But that had some impact.
Has some.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question about the TAS positions. What exactly is the touch point of each TAS position to the hiring process? Do they get involved in everyone's hiring at the council? And so let's say, could part of the problem be that we don't have enough TAS folks screening people?
Sure. So Chair Lee, members of the committee, TAS is a talent acquisition specialist. We have talent acquisition specialists here based in RA, and then talent acquisition specialists specifically to Metro Transit that handle Metro Transit hires. It could be. We did hear that from talent acquisition specialists, that depending on their workload, things maybe took a little bit longer, or there's just a lot of like ebb and flow with the workload. And sometimes a given requisition will have multiple hires within it, so it might look like one requisition and then you have 10 hires. So that is a possibility. When we were interviewing talent acquisition specialists, we did ask them about their workload, and Lakshmi, correct me if I'm wrong, but they reported about 10 requisitions, and each requisition could have like maybe 6 positions within it. And when we looked at the Society for Human Resource Management, they had benchmarks for recruiter workloads, and they were similar. I mean, they weren't like identical, but they were within a couple. So it's possible, or it could be just a more cumbersome process. But
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Chair.
Go ahead.
Simple rookie question here for HR, for those of you in HR. Real quick, been a lot of complaints about the use of AI in recruitment processes. So I just want to ask you straight up, has this been an issue? Have you heard of this, and how has this affected the recruitment process here?
Yes, thank you,
Yeah.
Chair, members of the committee. AI has had a significant impact
Okay.
on our recruiting process. We worked really closely with our partners in the Office of General Counsel, whether it is candidates who are using AI to answer live interview questions, whether or not they're generating their application materials with AI, we have seen a significant uptick in that, yes.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Councilmember Jenkins and then Councilmember Park.
So I wanna follow up on Councilmember Overtalken's question. Let's flip the table. Are we using, and I won't even go to AI, are we using some type of filter system within NeoGov or our onboarding review of candidates to help focus our recruiting?
Yes, Sarah, you want to speak to that?
Sure, thank you. We have some of our positions that we have scoring, so they will be automatically moved into certain buckets, but the talent acquisition specialists still verify with each candidate. So it's kind of a pre-screening tool, but we do verify. So overall, I would say they're seeing every single application.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
That was my question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, can you remember, pass it?
Thank you, Chair. So you said that there was some inequities between external candidate salaries and similarly situated internal employees. Is that that they tend to be paid higher, external folks, or what's the inequity that you're seeing?
Sure, Chair Lee, members of the committee. So just to be clear, audit was not able to, we didn't have that in our scope where we were reviewing external candidates compared to internal candidates and the salaries that they were brought in at. That is something that we heard from talent acquisition specialists and hiring managers. And I think I heard a mix of both, actually, where maybe in particular with internal candidates though, our interviewees reported that an internal candidate might be penalized for just having stayed at the council longer, or they didn't, their years of experience were quantified differently. So there was a tone of kind of uncertainty. I heard both, but it was just kind of a perception among hiring managers, just things that didn't seem right. But
Okay, and I just have one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you said that the classification review has a schedule, or there's a recommended schedule, I'm not sure which. But that they're sort of happening on an ad hoc basis right now. Is that HR is not keeping with the schedule at all, and it's just being ad hoc, or there's sort of a backlog, and so some are getting pulled in as needed along with that, with the backlog?
Chair Lee, members of the committee, I would say that it's both, but I will give HR an opportunity to respond to that.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. That's a great question. I will say I've been with council for about 2.5 years, And previous to the recent years, we have not maintained our programming consistently across the board. And so we really welcome this opportunity for feedback from the audit committee. As a result of not having a full maintenance program, not just for classification, but a full maintenance program, we've struggled. And then also up until recently, and I would speak to this as well, for recruitment capacity for the team. The organization has supported growing our talent acquisition specialist team specifically since mid-2024. Prior to that, along with maintenance, our staff was not where it needed to be able to maintain the day-to-day work and do a maintenance program. We are in a different space now, which is a great reason that we're looking at this now, and you'll see in 2024, 2025, it was built into the human resources strategic plan to begin addressing some of these deficiencies as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? I just have one last comment. Thanks for this great work. Our sandbox is the public sector, and you folks know better than I that you don't get paid enough to be here. And so it behooves us to make our hiring processes as transparent and as equitable as possible so that we can continue to maintain and attract the best talent. We already are one of the largest employers in the state of Minnesota. So anything that we can do to make our processes and systems better would be great. So thank you again for the work.
Thank you.
Next we will have our information items. The first one is internal controls and bank reconciliation.
Shirley, I just want to mention, as Angela and James are approaching the table, our esteemed colleague, committee member George, is a colleague of the two presenters at Protiviti, and so she has asked, indicated to you and I that she would like to recuse herself from this conversation, which we appreciate, and thank her for letting us know. With that, I can turn it back over to Angela and James.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Thank you for having us. My name is Angela Bickett. I'm a Managing Director with Protiviti. I'm joined by my colleague, James. I'll let him introduce himself.
Chair, please, members of the committee, my name is James McCann. I am also with Protiviti, our Director.
Thank you. Great.
Are you expecting a slide deck?
No, because it was an information update, we are just, yes,
Okay.
yeah, is that?
What?
Okay. Okay, that's the answer.
Thank you. I'm glad you had my back. I'm like, okay, we talked about it, but
That's awesome.
All right, so we'll provide an overview of the project, talk a little bit about some of the key activities that we performed, and then some of our high-level observations and results of it. So our engagement consisted of two work streams, the first being the internal controls documentation, and then the second, bank reconciliations. For the internal controls documentation, we really focused on the documentation and assessment of internal controls over several processes. And for our bank reconciliations work stream, we really focused on identifying those unknown variances between bank and general ledger accounts. So some of the key activities with the internal controls documentation were, we really started out by performing a risk assessment to identify which processes should be reviewed for this documentation. That risk assessment involved qualitative and quantitative factors and discussions with management, and then we identified a population or 12 processes that were risk assessed against those quantitative and qualitative factors, and we then identified 5 processes for in scope for documentation. With each of those 5 processes, we performed end-to-end walkthroughs of the process to identify the risks, the controls, and then make that assessment on the design of the controls. The documentation, the end product included process flows, risk and control matrices, as well as a process narrative. And then from there, we identified and compiled a list of any controls that were determined to be designed effectively and any controls where there might be opportunity for improvement.
For the bank reconciliation work stream, we performed walkthroughs with different individuals that helped us to understand the cash inflows and the cash outflows that would be generating differences within our bank and general ledger activity. With this information, we then reperformed the monthly bank reconciliations for the periods of June 2025 through October 2025, which helped us to then identify some of the root causes for these unidentified variances that had been changing from month over month. With that information, we were then able to design a scalable and repeatable process to improve this and help the team to isolate those differences that we had seen so that there were no new unidentified variances occurring from June through October, which we had reperformed.
So then from a results perspective, so for internal controls, we identified across the 5 processes a total of 146 controls. Of those, 117 were determined to be designed effectively. There were 29 controls that were identified as requiring some improvement, but overall, the controls that were identified for improvement, it certainly didn't represent any fundamental gaps with the process or controls. It was more of opportunities for management to further enhance or strengthen the controls within those processes. We shared the results with management and provided recommendations to address those control gaps, and part of those recommendations were for management to review the list, identify owners to perform some of that remediation and identify reasonable dates to remediate those.
For the bank reconciliation work stream, the main observations that we had shared with management were, first, the general ledger was closed on an annual basis instead of monthly basis, which is different from some of the subledgers such as payables and receivables. And from an annual financial reporting standpoint, that's all within the same period, but we were seeing variations from month to month, which was making it difficult for the team to focus in on the balance that they should be reconciling to. So it was a bit of a moving target. The second key observation that was driving a lot of the variances related to how the team was validating transactions that were coming out of the operating account into the other accounts, which are all the funds eventually end into the operating account, but that transactional level happens at the payroll account or the payables account or the other accounts. And so that was a key finding to reconcile at that transactional level to be able to identify all transactions within the month. And the third observation that we had was related to some relatively high volume of payroll returns and reissues where these can be done in batches, they can be difficult to track. A lot of the same numbers will be going in and going out at different, positive and negative. So just a very manual process really was causing some of those differences month over month and were hard to isolate.
That really concludes our update that we had prepared. Any questions?
Questions, comments from presenters?
I have a question,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chair. Who saw the report? I'm just wondering has that been published yet?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the report was really just shared internally with myself and Ned Smith, our CFO. Our audit team has access to it.
Okay.
And we also will, I can speak a little bit to next steps too. We have some additional work with Protiviti. We're also working with our Workiva tool to also, and I'm sort of speaking now my CRCO hat. Loading the work that Protiviti has done into our Workiva tool. So we can make the connections both with the audit realm and also the enterprise risk realm. So we'll document those, start to track those control gaps, and work on remediation plans from an internal controls perspective.
Okay, Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
a
go
follow-up question. Can you share with us what the 5 processes are that you determined needed review from your risk assessment?
Yes. Capital assets, financial reporting, treasury, AP, and payroll.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from the presenter? Thank you for the great work you did, and thanks for this report. The only other thing is, yeah, the only other thing is the next scheduled audit committee meeting, it's June 23rd, 2026, so we're about 3 months out. If there is nothing else on the agenda, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
All right.